I stood there in the cold, desolate hallway of the Dallas courthouse, my body frozen stiff between the drab gray concrete walls and the blinding glare of neon lights. I was Cooper Lawson, 38 years old, owner of a lumber manufacturing company that I had built from absolutely nothing with my own blood, sweat, and tears. But right now, inside that courtroom, everything was unfolding. The hearing to determine the legality of the power of attorney document that my parents, Wesley and Madeline, had used to seize complete control of my assets, my properties, and my company. The thick wooden door was tightly shut, yet the sounds of argument from within still leaked out, sharp as knives slicing into my ears. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to catch every word. The voice of David Coleman, my attorney, rang out fiercely, burning with anger. "Your Honor, this power of attorney is not only lacking in authenticity, but it was executed under completely illegal circumstances. We are talking about a man who was declared missing, yet the evidence clearly shows this was a deliberate conspiracy. David was always like that, razor sharp, uncompromising. He was the only friend I could still trust in this moment, the one who had helped me piece together every fragment of truth from the ruins of my life." The judge, a middle-aged man with a deep, authoritative voice, interrupted. "Counselor Coleman, please clarify further regarding Mr. Lawson's missing person status. All parties must present concrete evidence concerning the accident in Africa." My heart pounded. That accident. It still haunted me every single night. An endless nightmare. My parents, Wesley and Madeline, stuck stubbornly to their tired old story. "Our son went missing after the accident. We couldn't reach him. We didn't know whether he was alive or dead." My father, Wesley's voice trembled, but it was calculated. He had always been a skilled actor. My mother, Madeline, chimed in with her shrill tone. "We only did it to protect our son's assets, Your Honor." Then it was my wife's turn, Hannah. "Oh God, Hannah, the woman I once loved with all my soul, the mother of my daughter." Speaking in her capacity as the notary public, her voice was calm to the point of chilling. "I notarized the power of attorney under emergency circumstances, at a time when we believed Cooper was no longer capable of making decisions for himself." Emergency? I clenched my fist so hard my nails dug deep into my palms. She was lying outright. Every word from her mouth was another knife to my heart. David immediately fired back. "Your Honor, there are serious inconsistencies here. The date the document was executed does not align with the subsequent chain of asset transactions. They withdrew money, mortgaged properties, all while Mr. Lawson was still alive." The judge banged his gavel, ordering that every irregularity be recorded in the minutes. "We will need to consider a preliminary ruling based on this evidence." Every argument echoing from inside felt like a cold blade slicing into my consciousness. They weren't just words, they were bleeding wounds, reminding me of the most horrific betrayal imaginable. While I had been lying on the border between life and death in some remote hospital halfway around the world, my own family had calmly dragged my fate and my fortune into a courtroom. They didn't wait for me to wake up. They didn't pray for my survival. They only thought about money, power, and how to divvy up everything I had built. I swallowed my emotions, fighting to keep the tears from falling. My hand gripped the heavy wooden handle of the courtroom door. It was ice cold and unyielding, just like my heart had become. In my mind, images of my parents and my wife appeared as completely different people from the ones I had once trusted. My father, Wesley, the strong man who taught me how to hold my first saw. My mother, Madeline, who hugged me and cried when I fell off my bicycle as a child. And Hannah. She had once been the light of my life, with her warm smile and the evenings spent cradling our daughter Ruby to sleep. Now they were nothing but shadows, greedy figures willing to bury me alive for their share. The atmosphere inside grew increasingly heated. The shouting and arguing grew louder, signaling that the hearing was reaching its critical moment. I could feel the tension seeping through every crack in the door. The judge was weighing his decision. David was pressing hard, and my family was desperately holding their ground. My heart raced wildly, as if it might burst out of my chest. I took a deep breath. The frigid courthouse hallway air filled my lungs, but it did nothing to calm me. Standing in that corridor, surrounded by the hurried footsteps of strangers and the musty smell of old paperwork, I was suddenly pulled back into the flood of memories from the time before the accident, when everything in my life had not yet collapsed. I remember those days as clearly as if they were etched in stone, when life felt like a perfect painting I had created with my own hands. Back then, I was at the absolute peak of success. My lumber manufacturing company in Dallas was thriving steadily, with modern production lines running day and night, turning rough logs into high-end furniture exported all over the world. I had my own private office on the top floor of the company building with a panoramic view of the bustling city. I would often sit there for hours, analyzing financial reports and negotiating contracts over the phone. My wealth was solid, several overflowing bank accounts, steadily rising stocks, and a real estate portfolio that anyone would envy. A spacious, elegant house in the Dallas suburbs with a huge garden, a swimming pool that sparkled under the Texas sun, and a garage full of luxury cars. Life was so abundant that sometimes I asked myself, what more could I possibly want? And then there was my family, the most beautiful part of that picture. Hannah, my wife, was stunning with her golden blonde hair and a smile that could melt anyone. We met in college when she was studying law and I was struggling through business school of business. After 8 years of marriage, she was still the woman who made me proud every time I introduced her to business partners. Working as a notary public, Hannah was busy with her own career, but she always kept the house spotless and the dinners warm and welcoming. And Ruby, our little 6-year-old daughter, was as well behaved as an angel. She had her mother's big round eyes and loved to draw colorful pictures. Every evening, Ruby would sit at her little desk, concentrating on coloring, then come running into my arms the moment I got home. "Daddy, look what I drew. This is you flying in the sky." Those moments made me forget all the exhaustion, even the endless long-haul flights. To the outside world, my family was the perfect example to admire. Friends often said, "Cooper, you're one lucky bastard. Successful career, beautiful wife, well-behaved kid, life couldn't be more perfect." At company parties or family gatherings, we always appeared together, hand in hand, laughing and chatting. Hannah in her evening gown, Ruby toddling behind, and me in a perfectly tailored suit, telling business stories like some kind of hero. No one saw the tiny cracks that were quietly spreading beneath the surface. My job required constant travel, flying from Dallas to New York for partner meetings, then hopping on another plane to Canada to inspect timber sources, or even to Europe for trade fairs. The time my wife and I spent together grew shorter and shorter. Instead of falling asleep in Hannah's arms, I was on planes, my head spinning with numbers. At first, we still video called and checked in. "Have you eaten dinner? Is Ruby sleeping well?" But gradually the calls became rarer, replaced by short text messages. "I'll be home late tonight, go to sleep without me." The closeness was slowly eroded by physical distance and long silences. Hannah started getting irritable more often, complaining about raising our daughter alone. "It's always work, work, work with you. We need time together." I would comfort her. "Just this one last time, honey, it's a big contract. Once it's done, I'll take a break." But I knew those promises were repeated over and over, and Hannah began looking at me with distant eyes. I thought it was just a phase, that love would overcome it. I was wrong. As for my parents, Wesley and Madeline, they lived in a small town a few hours' drive from Dallas. We weren't close geographically, and we rarely shared emotional intimacy either. My father, Wesley, was a retired carpenter who liked to tinker with old furniture in the garage. My mother, Madeline, spent her days gardening and cooking. I rarely visited, maybe just a few times a year during holidays. But I always provided financially, sending monthly transfers to cover utilities, groceries, even building them a new house 2 years ago. "I'm really busy, but you understand, right?" I'd say over the phone. They would laugh and say it was fine, but looking back now, perhaps behind those smiles was a quiet resentment had been building. To me back then, financial support was the clearest measure of filial duty. Money sent on time, bills paid promptly, that was enough. I didn't realize that love needs more than that. It needs long conversations, warm hugs, not just numbers in a bank account. Then one day, everything changed. It was a Monday morning. I was sitting in my office, cold coffee beside me, when an email from our African partner popped up. A huge contract, rare tropical hardwood, absolutely critical for our production chain. If we secured it, revenue would double and new markets would open. If we failed, we risked losing other contracts and possibly going bankrupt. "Boss, the future of this company rests on this one deal," my assistant said urgently. I nodded, heart racing with excitement and pressure. This wasn't a normal business trip. I had to go to Africa in person to negotiate, inspect the sites, and sign the papers. The pressure was crushing. A packed schedule, non-stop meetings, and the risks of an unfamiliar environment. I packed in a hurry. Hannah stood in the bedroom doorway, watching me with a sad expression. "You're leaving again?" "How long this time?" she asked softly, but with unmistakable reproach. "Just 2 weeks, babe. This contract is huge. Once it's done, I'll make time for the family." I hugged her, but the embrace was brief and lacked warmth. Ruby ran in and tugged at my shirt. "Don't go, Daddy. I want you to stay and draw with me." I knelt down and kissed her cheek. "I promise I'll bring you a really big present from Africa, maybe a wooden elephant." Ruby smiled, but her eyes were red. I left with my mind consumed by business calculations, paying little attention to the silent fractures in my family. I thought it was just one more trip. Everything would be fine. I never imagined it would turn into a tragedy. The flight lasted over 20 hours, with multiple layovers in Europe that left me exhausted. When I finally landed in Africa, hot, dusty red air greeted me. I rented a car and drove between industrial zones, meeting local partners. The meetings went smoothly. Price negotiations, timber quality checks, logistics planning. But deep down, I started feeling lonely. Nights alone in the hotel, I tried video calling Hannah, but the signal was weak and conversations kept cutting out. "Ruby and I miss you so much," she said. "I miss you too." "The deal is almost done. I'll be home soon," I replied, but my mind was still spinning with numbers. Then the fateful day arrived. I was being driven back from the industrial area to my lodging on a bumpy road full of potholes. The local driver was joking around, the radio playing cheerful local music. Red dust swirled in the wind, obscuring visibility. Suddenly, a large logging truck loaded with timber came barreling from the opposite direction, lost control when its wheel dropped into a deep pothole. The screech of brakes was deafening. I only had time to shout, "Watch out!" on instinct. The truck veered sharply, its front swinging sideways and slamming into the side of our vehicle with terrifying force. Our car was thrown off course, spun and rolled violently. Glass shattered everywhere. My body was flung around, pain exploding through me as blood poured from deep wounds. Consciousness began to fade amid the chaos. Screams, the acrid smell of burning rubber and red dust covering everything. I tried to crawl out, but my limbs wouldn't respond. Blood dripped from my forehead into my eyes, blurring everything. I whispered for help, my voice feeble. Locals were running toward us, shouting in a language I didn't understand. Before I completely blacked out, the last thing I registered was the distant wail of an ambulance siren echoing through the dusty, chaotic scene. My heart pounded in terror. Am I going to die here? Hannah, Ruby. I didn't even get to say goodbye. I sank into an endless void, where there was no pain, no sound, only nothingness. I don't know how long I drifted there, maybe hours, days, or even weeks, until faint flickers of consciousness began to return. First came the steady beep-beep, like the heartbeat of a machine. Then the smell, the sharp sting of disinfectant mixed with sweat and red earth. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy. When I finally forced them open, everything was a hazy blur. Where was I? Still in Africa? A hospital? Or was this hell? I woke up in the intensive care unit of a hospital. My entire body throbbed with excruciating pain, as though thousands of needles were stabbing me from every direction. I was almost completely paralyzed. My arms and legs felt like lead, and even trying to twitch a finger exhausted me so much that cold sweat poured out. My mind was coming back, but I still couldn't speak. My throat was a desert, raw and burning. Every breath was labored, my lungs struggling beneath the weight of tubes and medical equipment covering my body. Machines clicked and hummed. Wires and tubes were wrapped around my arms, chest, and head. I tried to look around. Stark white walls, blinding fluorescent lights, and shadowy figures in white coats gliding past like ghosts. A doctor entered, a middle-aged black man with a warm, deep voice carrying a clipboard. He performed a basic examination, checking my pulse, testing reflexes by tapping my knee, shining a pen light into my eyes to gauge responsiveness. I felt everything clearly, his cold fingers on my skin, the piercing light making my eyes ache, but I couldn't communicate. I wanted to scream, "What happened? Where am I?" But the words stuck in my throat. All that came out was a faint, guttural groan. The doctor smiled reassuringly. "You've just come out of a coma, that's already very good. Don't try to speak, you're still extremely weak." He scribbled something, then left, leaving me alone with fear gnawing at me every second. The days that followed were living hell. I lay motionless, staring at the blank white ceiling, counting every tiny crack just to keep my mind from slipping away. The pain was so intense I had to clench my teeth. Tears rolled down my cheeks and I couldn't even wipe them away. Nurses took turns injecting painkillers and washing me, but every touch felt like torture. My consciousness flickered in and out. Chaotic dreams flooded in. Hannah smiling, Ruby waving, then suddenly the car flipping, blood everywhere. I kept wondering, does my family know? Are they worried? Or do they think I'm already dead? After many days of intensive monitoring, IV drips, constant blood pressure checks, and endless tests, my condition finally stabilized. My breathing improved. I no longer needed the ventilator tube. I was fully conscious again, my mind sharp. I could speak slowly, my voice raspy like an old man's. "Water. I need water." A nurse smiled and brought me a cup with a straw. For the first time in weeks, I felt cool liquid slide down my parched throat. That same afternoon, local police came to the hospital. 2 uniformed officers with notebooks and a recorder. They took my initial statement. "Do you remember anything about the accident? The truck came at you, right?" I nodded weakly and recounted what fragments remained. The rough road, the horrific impact. They wrote everything down, processed the paperwork for the serious traffic collision, and promised to investigate the truck driver. "You're very lucky, Mr. Lawson. Very few people survive a crash as bad as yours." The doctor returned that afternoon and sat beside my bed, his face grave. "Mr. Lawson, you were in a deep coma for almost 3 weeks. There were many moments when you were critical. Your heart stopped for several seconds, your blood pressure crashed. We thought you wouldn't make it. The news hit me like ice water. 3 weeks? I had been hovering between life and death while the world outside kept moving. My heart raced. Cold sweat broke out again. I've been here 3 weeks. My God, I whispered, imagining myself almost dying in a foreign land, completely alone. Terror surged through me. If I had died, what would happen to Ruby? What would Hannah tell our daughter? And my company, my assets? What would become of everything? I had just stepped back from the brink of death by the skin of my teeth, and now I truly understood how fragile life is. In the following days, my body slowly began to heal. With the help of medical staff, I started moving my arms and legs again, little by little. Nurses helped me sit up, then take my first painful, hopeful steps. Every morning, I looked out the hospital window at the red dust swirling outside and told myself, I have to recover fast and get home. My family must be worried sick. The doctor encouraged me. You're making excellent progress. In a few more weeks, you should be discharged. I nodded, but anxiety was already creeping in. I needed to contact my family. They must be frantic. About a week after fully regaining consciousness, when I was finally clear-headed enough, I asked to use my personal phone. The nurse nodded and retrieved it from my belongings, which the hospital had kept since I was brought in unconscious. My hands shook as I took it. The battery was still charged, but the screen was covered in dust and scratches. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up, and then a flood of notifications poured in that left me frozen. As I scrolled up to the very first ones, an icy chill ran down my spine, while I had been lying on the edge of life and death with no one knowing whether I would ever wake up. Back home, someone had quietly reached into my life, turned it upside down, and taken control. Everything I had believed was secure and untouchable, my company, my wealth, my family, had apparently been touched, manipulated in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. But one thing I now knew for certain: nothing was the same anymore. I lay there on the hospital bed in that remote African ward, clutching my phone with trembling hands as if it were a ticking bomb. The screen lit up with a flood of overlapping notifications, each one stabbing straight into my heart. The first alerts were from my banks back in the United States, both my personal accounts and the company accounts. Withdrawal: $50,000 from personal account. Reason: emergency expenses. Then, withdrawal: $100,000 from company account. Authorized by Wesley Lawson. My father? My heart pounded wildly. Cold sweat broke out even though the room was air-conditioned. Those weren't small sums, they were the money I had saved for Ruby's future, for the company's expansion plans. Who gave them permission to touch it? I wasn't even dead. Next came a barrage of emails from the company's finance department. I opened them one by one, my vision blurring from shock. Notice: change of legal representative. Mr. Wesley Lawson has been granted temporary authority. Then, temporary transfer of operational control of the company to Mrs. Madeline Lawson due to owner being reported missing. Missing? I'm right here, alive. I curled up on the bed trying to breathe steadily, but my chest felt crushed in a vice. All control over my assets and my business had been handed to my parents through a power of attorney document I had never signed. How was this possible? I had never once discussed giving them power of attorney. That company was my life's work, built from nothing with my bare hands, borrowing money everywhere just to buy the first machines. And now, in the 3 weeks I lay in a coma, it had been stolen from me? In a panic, I checked the transaction history, my fingers swiping so fast I nearly dropped the phone. Then one notification from the mortgage bank hit me like a sledgehammer. Dallas residence has been mortgaged for a $200,000 loan. Signed by Wesley Lawson, pursuant to power of attorney. My house, the home Hannah and I had chosen together, where Ruby had grown up surrounded by flowers in our little swimming pool. We had paid it off over years of hard work, and now they had put it on the gambling table. I pictured my father signing the papers, my mother nodding beside him while I was fighting for my life on the other side of the world. Hot tears rolled down my cheeks. This was no coincidence. The legal changes had come in waves. Withdrawals, transfers of authority, mortgaging the house, all while I was unconscious. Someone had planned this, and they had moved lightning fast, as if they were certain I would never wake up. Fear turned to rage, and rage turned to resolve. I couldn't just lie here and let everything slip away. I immediately contacted my personal attorney, David Coleman, through our secure encrypted messaging app, the one we used for sensitive contracts. My hands shook as I typed, "David, it's me, Cooper. I'm alive. I had an accident in Africa and was in a coma for 3 weeks. Check my accounts and the company immediately. Something is very, very wrong." I quickly explained the accident, the coma, and every suspicious transaction in email. David replied within seconds, "Cooper, my God, you're alive. I'm on it right now. Do not contact anyone else. I'll keep this completely confidential." His tone, even in text, was filled with worry but also determination. David had been my most trusted friend since college. He wasted no time. Using his extensive network, he gained access to court records and registries back in the States. Only a few hours later, he called me on an encrypted line. "Cooper, I have bad news. There is, on official record, a notarized power of attorney document bearing your name. That grants your parents full authority over your assets, your company, everything." I went numb, my mouth dry as dust. "Power of attorney? I never signed anything." David sighed heavily. "Exactly. Preliminary forensic analysis shows clear signs of forgery. The pen strokes don't match your real signature, and there are traces of copying. But the worst part, he paused. The document bears the official notary seal and signature of Hannah herself. Your wife personally notarized it. Hannah, my wife, the woman I loved more than anyone. The full truth crashed over me like a tidal wave. She didn't just know, she actively participated. She stamped a forged signature as authentic, helping my parents seize everything while I lay half dead in Africa. Did she even think about Ruby? About me? Or only about the money? Tears came again, but this time they burned with fury. She did this? She betrayed me? My voice broke over the phone. David calmed me down. Stay calm, Cooper. This is blatant fraud. My advice: keep your recovery absolutely secret. Do not contact anyone in your family. Let them continue believing you're still missing. Meanwhile, I'm going to start preparing a fraud lawsuit in Texas courts. We have evidence. Transaction records, handwriting analysis, and your hospital records proving you were in a coma when they created the document. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. This was the only way. In that moment, I understood that a legal war against my own family had begun while I was still unconscious on this hospital bed. They were no longer my family. They were my enemies, people willing to bury me alive for their share. I lay there in the African hospital room, staring out the window at the ever-swirling red dust. But my mind had already flown back to Dallas. Every breath carried pain, not just from the wounds on my body, but from the deep gashes in my heart. Hannah, the woman to whom I had given my entire life, had now become the official witness to my betrayal. My parents, Wesley and Madeline, the people who brought me into this world and raised me, were nothing more than greedy shadows. I gripped the phone so tightly it felt like my only weapon. David Coleman, my attorney, had become my sole ally, the only person left I could trust. We're going to take everything back, Cooper, he said over the encrypted call. But we need patience. I have to gather ironclad evidence first. The days that followed in the hospital were a strange blend of physical recovery and strategic warfare. My body grew stronger little by little. I could walk with crutches, eat solid food again, but my mind was on a battlefield. Back in the States, David never stopped working. He collected everything: hospital records proving I was in a coma, forensic reports confirming the forged signature, full bank transaction histories, and proof that Hannah herself had notarized the fraudulent power of attorney. "I've got enough to file," he messaged one day. And then he did. He officially sued in Texas state court, demanding immediate cancellation of the fake power of attorney and a freeze on all my assets. I pictured David striding into the courthouse, thick folders under his arm, his voice sharp as a blade. "This is a clear-cut case of fraud, Your Honor." While my client, Mr. Cooper Lawson, lay in a coma after a near-fatal accident, the defendant stripped him of everything he owns. My pulse raced just thinking about it. The counterattack had begun. Because the case was flagged as emergency fraud, the court moved fast. After a preliminary review, they issued an immediate freeze on every account in Wesley and Madeline's names. All the huge sums they had already withdrawn, money I had poured years of sweat into earning, were locked down. No more transfers, no more spending. David updated me. "They can't touch another penny of yours, Cooper. The banks have the court order in hand." For the first time in weeks, I smiled, though the smile tasted bitter. I imagined Wesley opening his banking app and seeing the red banner, "Account frozen by court order." The man who always prided himself on being clever, suddenly handcuffed. The banks themselves didn't waste time either. Once they detected massive withdrawals authorized by a suspiciously timed power of attorney, they fired off formal demand letters. Since all alerts are always sent to the original account holder as well, my phone, now reactivated after weeks in a coma, phone exploded with them. A few hours later, David forwarded me the exact letter the bank had sent my parents. "Dear Mr. Wesley Lawson, you are hereby required to provide lawful documentation supporting the power of attorney and the purpose of the $150,000 withdrawal within 7 days. Those cold, formal words cut like a knife. They had to prove the legality of a document that was completely forged. I closed my eyes and pictured Madeline opening that email, her hand trembling, her face going white. The woman who used to be my mother, now facing the law because of her own greed. The mortgage they had taken out on my house was suspended pending the court's final ruling. That house, filled with memories of Hannah, Ruby, and me, was safe for now. No one could sell it or borrow against it again. David actually laughed over the phone. They thought they could cash out on your home? Not anymore. I exhaled in relief, but the pain remained. How could they gamble away the roof over their own granddaughter's head? Ruby was probably still playing in the garden, unaware the house had almost been lost. At the company, the drama was even more intense. Wesley, who had crowned himself temporary CEO, was suddenly stripped of signing authority by an emergency asset preservation order. I imagined him walking into the office like he owned the place, only to have the secretary hand him the notice. "Sir, the court has suspended all your transaction rights." What would his face look like? Shock, rage, fear? My company, my lifeblood, the humming production lines, the loyal employees was now shielded from his hands. The internal accounting department received a subpoena demanding every single record from the period I was in a coma. Invoices, transfers, contracts. David said, "This will expose everything. Every suspicious transaction will be turned inside out." And Hannah, she was summoned for an internal investigation by the State Notary Oversight Board because of a formal complaint regarding a document she had notarized. As a notary public, she was legally obligated to verify authenticity, yet her seal was on a forged power of attorney. David told me, "They've called her in. They suspect serious ethical violations, possibly criminal." My stomach twisted at the thought of her sitting in that hearing room trying to explain why she stamped a fake signature as genuine. The strong, proud woman I married now risked losing her license, maybe even facing charges. I didn't feel triumph, only sorrow and fury. Why Hannah? For money? Or because she had stopped loving me long ago? The mounting irregularities were starting to panic them. I could feel it through David's updates. They sensed an invisible enemy methodically closing every escape route. Wesley and Madeline were slowly realizing their supposedly airtight plan was being dismantled step by step. They had acted in haste, convinced I was either dead or gone forever. Now everything was reversing. Money frozen, house untouchable, company out of reach. David said, "They're holding emergency family meetings, shouting at each other. Wesley is blaming Hannah. She's crying and defending herself. Meanwhile, I kept my recovery an absolute secret. Not one call, not one message, just silence from Africa. I let them go on believing I was still missing. I focused on getting stronger, walking the hospital corridors, breathing the hot, dusty air, but my mind never left Dallas. Every day I thought of Ruby. Was she crying for her daddy? Asking, "Mommy, when is Daddy coming home?" Was Hannah comforting her with lies? That thought gave me strength. I had to get home. I had to hold my daughter again. I had to reclaim my life. Every small victory in the States reached me through David's encrypted messages and midnight calls. Accounts frozen. Hannah summoned. Company stable. Your employees are still loyal to you. Each update was another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. I understood the legal trap was already sprung. We were only waiting for the perfect moment for me to step out of the shadows. Like a predator in the tall grass, I waited, patient and silent, for the trial, for them to dig their hole even deeper, until the day I would finally appear and watch their world collapse. And that moment finally arrived, pulling reality back into sharp focus as I stood silently outside the courtroom door. I was there again, in the chilly hallway of the Dallas courthouse, my back pressed against the cold wall, ear glued to the heavy wooden door. The air was stifling. Old paper, nervous sweat, and tension so thick it took me straight back to that African hospital ward, where from the wreckage of my life, I had planned every step of this. From inside the courtroom, the fierce argument still raged between my attorney and my parents and wife. David's voice cut through like a blade, blazing with controlled fury. Your Honor, the contradictions in the defendant's testimony are undeniable. They claimed Mr. Cooper Lawson was missing, yet they acted as if he were already dead, draining accounts, mortgaging his home, seizing control of his company. My father, Wesley, shot back in a trembling but defiant voice. We only did it to protect our son's assets. He was missing. The company and the property needed someone to manage them. My mother, Madeline, added in her shrill, artificially emotional tone, We are his parents, Your Honor. We were thinking of our granddaughter Ruby's future. Then Hannah, my wife, spoke with the calm, professional cadence of a notary. The power of attorney was executed under emergency circumstances of extreme urgency. I notarized it based on the information available at the time. Every word was another slash across my heart. They were still clinging to the same tired script. Missing, emergency, protecting the assets. But now it sounded so hollow it was almost laughable. I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms, fighting the rage boiling inside me. Then came the signal from David, a single soft vibration in the phone hidden in my pocket. It's time. Come in. My heart pounded like war drums in my chest. This was the moment I had waited for. After weeks in that hospital bed, after secret flights back to Dallas, after sleepless nights plotting with David. I drew a deep breath. The frigid hallway air flooded my lungs, carrying the scent of justice drawing near. My hand settled on the massive wooden courtroom door, cold and unyielding, just like my heart had become. I pushed gently. The hinges groaned, and I stepped inside before the eyes of everyone present. The entire courtroom fell into instant, absolute silence. The arguing stopped as if someone had hit mute. Every head turned. Every pair of eyes locked on me. The clerk, security, a handful of onlookers, and most importantly, my family. I stood there in the flesh, wearing the crisp black suit David had prepared for me, hair neatly trimmed after months of hospital chaos. Wesley froze like a statue, his face draining of all color as though he'd seen a ghost. His eyes bulged, mouth hanging open, body rigid for several long seconds. The man who once taught me how to hold a saw now stared at me like I was an apparition risen from the grave. I could see the vein throbbing in his neck, his knuckles white as he gripped the chair. Madeline was worse. She clutched the armrest as if she might collapse, shaking her head over and over, whispering, No, it can't be. My son is alive." The eyes that once looked at me with love were now flooded with terror and guilt. The mother who used to hold me and cry when I got hurt as a child now looked at me like a stranger, an enemy. My heart twisted, but I kept my face calm, expressionless. Hannah shot to her feet without thinking, white as paper, every trace of her earlier composure shattered. She covered her mouth, eyes wide with horror, as if a corpse had just walked in from hell. Hannah, the woman I once loved with every fiber of my being, the mother of my daughter, stood trembling, her neat work dress crumpled where her fists had clenched the fabric. She took one stumbling step backward and nearly fell. The judge, a stern middle-aged man in glasses, stared at me in stunned disbelief. He tapped his gavel lightly, voice faltering for the first time. Who is this? Clerk, verify this individual's identity immediately." The young court clerk hurried over, hands shaking as she checked the documents I handed her. My passport and the official hospital discharge papers from Africa. "Your Honor, identity confirmed 100%. This is Cooper Lawson, the plaintiff in this case." A ripple of gasps and whispers swept the room, but the judge banged the gavel harder. "Silence! Mr. Lawson, you are the individual reported missing?" I nodded, my voice steady and heavy. "Yes, Your Honor. I am very much alive, and I am here to set the record straight." My appearance demolished the entire foundation of their missing person defense. They had built their whole case on the story that I had vanished after the accident, unreachable, possibly dead. Now I stood before them in the flesh, and every lie collapsed like a house of cards. David allowed himself the faintest smile from the counsel table, his eyes saying, "We just flipped the board." The judge declared an immediate recess for emergency consultation. This hearing is suspended for 30 minutes. All parties remain in the courtroom. Everyone rose, but no one dared move. The room felt frozen in time, the air so thick it was hard to breathe. I stood motionless in the center of the room, saying nothing. My gaze slowly swept over the faces I once called family: father, mother, wife. There was no more rage, no more pain, only an icy calm that made it impossible for them to meet my eyes. For the first time since everything fell apart, we were truly face to face, not in a warm home filled with memories, but in a cold courtroom where the truth had nowhere left to hide. From the instant I walked through that door, I felt the tide turn completely. Every statement they had made, every scheme they had orchestrated, every lie they had told for months suddenly became worthless. No one dared speak another word. The tension was stretched so tight it could snap with a touch. I looked around and saw it clearly. The moment I appeared, the entire game changed. This was no longer the trial they controlled. This was the moment the truth stood firmly on my side, and none of them had anywhere left to run. After a brief consultation with his clerks, the judge returned to the bench looking graver than ever. He banged the gavel hard, demanding silence, then delivered the court's immediate orders regarding the power of attorney and every asset in my name, based on the new evidence and the appearance of the plaintiff in person. This court hereby declares the power of attorney null and void with immediate effect. All transactions involving Mr. Cooper Lawson's personal accounts, real estate, and company remain frozen pending final judgment. His voice rang out like hammer blows, each word nailing their plan into its coffin. Wesley dropped his head, staring at the floor. Madeline covered her mouth and sobbed quietly. Hannah sat motionless, eyes glazed, staring into nothingness. The judge continued, "This matter is now formally referred to the District Attorney's Office for criminal fraud investigation. All involved parties will be summoned for statements." That was the explosion. It was no longer a civil dispute. It had become a crime. I could feel the fear radiating from their side of the room. Wesley's knuckles turned white as he gripped the chair. Madeline kept shaking her head in disbelief, and Hannah bit her lip, fighting back tears. The hearing was adjourned, with the next session to be scheduled after additional investigation results were in. All parties are free to leave but may not exit the state of Texas without prior notification. One final bang of the gavel and the courtroom began to empty amid hushed whispers. David and I walked out in silence, my steps steady down the cold hallway. He clapped me on the shoulder. "You did great, Cooper. They're cornered." I didn't smile. There was no triumph, only a heavy sadness. Wesley and Madeline remained seated, stripped of all control over my fortune, their eyes filled with fear and helplessness. Wesley looked up at me pleadingly, stammering, "Son, let's talk." I turned my back without a word. Madeline cried louder, calling my name. Hannah left the courthouse in a daze, legs unsteady, knowing everything was slipping from her grasp. She glanced at me one last time, eyes red and swollen, but I looked away. I refused to let old feelings resurface. That afternoon passed in a storm of emotions. I drove to our Dallas house, the beautiful home Hannah and I had built together over the years. The familiar tree-lined street, the pool glinting in the late sunlight, the garden where Ruby loved to run. But now it was no longer a home, just a building full of painful memories. I pulled into the garage, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The house was dark, yet I sensed someone there. When I switched on the living room lights, Hannah was sitting on the sofa, face gaunt, eyes swollen from crying. The moment she saw me, she leapt up, started toward me as if to embrace me, then stopped halfway. "Cooper, you're home. I don't know what to say." Her voice shook with desperation. I stood still, looking at the woman who had once been my everything, now merely the embodiment of betrayal. In a rush, she shoved all blame onto Wesley and Madeline, words tumbling out like a flood. "It was your parents. They planned everything. They pressured me into notarizing the document to save your assets. They said if you never came back, everything would be lost to the courts." I was dragged into it. She waved her arms frantically, trying to paint herself as the victim. I remained silent, watching the performance with an icy heart. The smart, poised Hannah I married was gone. Her excuses now sounded clumsy and pathetic. When she realized I wasn't softening, not even a flicker of reaction, she broke down completely, tears streaming down her face. I was wrong, Cooper. I panicked. I made a terrible mistake. I never thought it would go this far. I thought it was only temporary, just to protect everything. Please forgive me. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing, shoulders shaking. I remembered the other time she had cried when Ruby was born, after long, exhausting days, but these tears no longer touched me. I had no interest in hearing another excuse. I walked back to the garage, retrieved the folder from Africa, the medical report that proved I had been on the brink of death, and placed it on the coffee table in front of her with a dry thud. "Read it, Hannah." My voice was calm, but that very calmness made her flinch. She looked down at the bold heading, "Patient in critical condition. Next of kin notified, Hannah Lawson." Each word cut the air like a blade. I continued low and razor-sharp. "They called you the second they thought I might die. You were the very first person who knew. You asked exactly one question. Then you disappeared from my life." Hannah trembled, clutching the paper so hard the edges crumpled. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I thought you were gone. I gave a bitter, humorless smile. Didn't know what to do? A wife doesn't know what to do when her husband is dying, yet you knew exactly what to do with my bank accounts. She shook her head, tears falling faster. I just did what Richard and Helen told me. They said it was the only way." I cut her off, no longer allowing evasion. "Stop blaming them. You were the one who contacted them. You were the one who notarized a forged signature. No one forced you. It was your choice." Hannah crumpled, shoulders heaving. "Cooper, please. Just one chance. Only one." I looked down at her, no longer seeing the woman I had loved, only the woman who had left me to die half a world away. "Your chance ended the day you put your pen to that paper." The air in the house was thick, as if the walls themselves knew the marriage was over. I set my phone on the table and opened the complete call and message logs David had obtained from the carrier. Every record from the day I was admitted until today. I turned the screen toward her. "Look, this is every single contact you made while I lay in a coma for 2 months." She stared, eyes bloodshot. I scrolled slowly, week by week. Nothing. Not one message. Not one call. Not one sign of concern. I spoke slowly, each word a needle. "No, how is he?" "No, Ruby misses Daddy so much." Nothing. Just silence. A deadly silence. Hannah shook, lips trembling. I was busy with Ruby, the house. I thought the hospital would email updates." I let out a cold, sharp laugh that made her flinch. "The hospital called you 3 times. They emailed you. You read every one. Then you vanished. You weren't busy, Hannah. You chose to be busy so you wouldn't have to care." Every excuse collapsed in front of me. No more coercion, no more confusion. Only one naked truth remained. She had never waited for me to live. She had only waited for my money to be divided. She whispered, voice breaking like glass. "I was wrong, Cooper. I didn't mean. I was afraid of losing everything." I looked at her for a long moment, the woman I had once called my wife, and felt only cold emptiness. "I almost lost my life, and the only thing you were afraid of losing was money." Nothing left to salvage, nothing more to say. The truth lay stripped bare. No apology could cover it again. Finally, Hannah fell to her knees, clinging to my legs, begging. "Please, Cooper, I'm begging you, forgive me. I'll accept any punishment, I'll do anything, just don't push me out of your life. Ruby needs her mother, we need each other. I love you, I was wrong." Tears soaked the floor, her voice raw with desperation. I looked down, my heart aching. This scene had once been my worst nightmare, but now it was reality. The woman who had been the light of my life was on her knees pleading. I remembered our wedding day, her radiant smile, nights wrapped in each other's arms, Ruby's birthdays with cake and laughter, all shattered by greed and indifference. I answered, voice like ice, "No, Hannah. Everything will be settled in open court, including the divorce and your criminal liability for fraud. Ruby will live with me, and you will face the consequences of what you did." I gently but firmly removed her hands and stepped back. She cried harder, but the pleas stopped. She simply sat there, defeated. Eventually, she stood, wiped her face, and walked out in shame, without looking back. The door closed with a heavy thud, footsteps fading down the driveway. The house that had once symbolized family happiness had just become the place where my marriage officially died. I sank onto the sofa, looked around at the family photos still on the walls, Ruby's toys scattered on the floor, and let the tears fall, not for Hannah, but for Ruby, and for everything we had lost. That night I lay awake, memories flooding back like a storm. I remembered moving into this house with Hannah, laughing as we painted the walls, her saying, "This will be our forever home," now that forever was broken. I thought of Ruby, sleeping at her grandparents' house tonight. Tomorrow morning I would pick her up, hold her tight, and promise she would never suffer again. The war wasn't over. My parents still faced court. More hearings awaited, but tonight I had closed one excruciating chapter. Tomorrow I would begin the rest of my life, and Ruby's, without them. The next morning, Dallas sunlight streamed through the windows, bringing its familiar warmth, yet it couldn't touch the cold that had settled inside me. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring out at the garden where Ruby used to chase her ball, her laughter filling the house. The doorbell rang suddenly, snapping me out of my thoughts. I glanced through the window and felt my chest tighten. Wesley and Madeline stood on my doorstep, stripped of all their former arrogance, looking panicked and broken. My father, Wesley, the man who always stood tall and proud, was now hunched, shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. My mother, Madeline, had red, swollen eyes, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. They were no longer authoritative parents. They were just two frightened old people. I opened the door without a word and stepped aside to let them in. They entered, and the air grew heavy. Wesley looked around the living room at the family photos still hanging on the walls, now silent accusations of everything that had shattered. Madeline sank onto the sofa, hands trembling as she wiped tears. Wesley spoke first, voice hoarse. "We need to talk." I sat across from them, silent, waiting. They begged for forgiveness, words pouring out like a river. "Son, we were wrong. We panicked. We thought you wouldn't survive. Please drop the charges. Give the family a way to live. We're blood, Cooper. Don't send your parents to prison. Think what people will say. The whole family will be laughed at." Madeline sobbed. "I'm old. I won't survive prison. Think of Ruby. Think of the relatives." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked calmly how they had known I was in the hospital when the accident happened halfway across the world. The question hung like a time bomb. They glanced at each other, stammering. "Cooper, we heard from," Wesley began, but under my cold stare they couldn't keep lying. Finally, they admitted the truth. Hannah had been the first to contact them after receiving the call from the African hospital. "She called us that very night," Madeline whispered, voice thick with guilt. "Hannah said you were in a deep coma, very low chance of survival. She was crying, told us we had to prepare." I sat motionless and let them talk. After Hannah delivered the news that I might not live, the three of them spiraled into panic and fear. Wesley's voice shook as he described it. "We sat in the kitchen. Hannah was sobbing. I was pacing. We were terrified, Cooper. Terrified you'd die. Terrified everything would fall apart." Over the following days, they met constantly to prepare for the worst. It started with practical worries, medical bills. How will we pay if he's in hospital for months? Then the company. Who will run it if he can't sign anything? Loans and cash flow were stalling because I couldn't authorize anything. Madeline added, tears falling. "We thought we were just being cautious, son. But then, from those conversations, they slowly realized a harsh truth. If I died, my entire fortune would enter a long, complicated probate process. Taxes, possible disputes with other relatives, court oversight. They might lose everything. Wesley admitted, head bowed. I thought about inheritance law. Do you even have a will? Without one, the court would divide everything between your wife and us, but the process could drag on for years. Taxes would eat it up. Fights would break out. We could end up with nothing. Fear of losing everything to legal red tape crept in and quietly turned initial worry into calculation. Madeline cried, I was scared Ruby would be left with nothing, scared our family would go bankrupt because you were gone. They came to understand that unless they acted quickly, my money and company would be tied up in procedures none of them could control. Wesley continued, voice breaking. We met 3 times a week at the coffee shop near the house. At first, we just talked in circles, but the atmosphere grew heavier. Everyone was guarded and greed started to take root. In that stifling atmosphere of suspicion and budding greed, Hannah was the first to break the silence with a concrete proposal. Wesley admitted, filled with regret, it was Hannah. She said the safest solution was to create a power of attorney while you were still alive, but unable to make decisions, transferring control to us. At first, Wesley and Madeline hesitated. Is that even right? Madeline had asked. But Hannah's cold, logical arguments, the value of the company, the house, the accounts, and the nightmare of waiting for a death certificate and probate, gradually wore them down. She painted the picture. If we wait until he's declared dead, the courts get involved, inheritance taxes are brutal, relatives fight. But if we do the power of attorney now, we keep everything. They confessed that Hannah was the one who first suggested the power of attorney, and then orchestrated how to make it legal by using her position as notary. She said she'd notarize it, make the signature look like yours, Wesley said, staring at the floor. We agreed, thinking we were protecting the family. I listened in silence, the full picture now crystal clear. The moment Hannah learned I was in a coma, she didn't choose to wait and pray. She went straight to my parents to plot how to seize my estate. No flight to Africa, no vigil at my bedside, only calculations. Wesley and Madeline kept pleading, blaming sudden greed and fear of losing everything if I died. We were wrong, son. But it was panic. Drop the charges, let us avoid prison. We'll make it up to you. Madeline fell to her knees, clinging to my legs, sobbing. I looked them straight in the eye, voice low but so cold it stopped them dead. When I was lying between life and death in a foreign land, I said slowly, every word deliberate. The very first thing you thought about wasn't whether I was still breathing, but how to keep as much of my money as possible for yourselves. Wesley's voice cracked. Cooper, you've got it wrong. I cut him off. No more chances. No. I understand perfectly. I placed a hand over my heart to steady my breathing. I almost died alone on the other side of the world. And what did you do? You held meetings. You planned. You calculated. You divided the spoils. Madeline wailed. Son. We were distraught. We were only trying to do what was best for the family. I held their gaze. That wasn't love. That was greed. And you both know it. The living room fell into a silence so heavy the ticking of the wall clock sounded like hammer blows. Wesley tried one last time. Cooper, we're family. We can talk this out, find another way, drop the charges, let everything. I stood up straight, eyes sharp as steel. I will not withdraw a single filing. My voice was steady, unshaking. From now on, everything will be settled by the law. No more deals. No more ambiguity, no more doing things behind my back. Madeline choked out, You really want to drag your parents into court? I looked at her and it hurt more than I expected. Justice has to be served, even if it tears me apart. Wesley bowed his head. Madeline sobbed uncontrollably. I stood there, feeling no victory, no rage, only a hollow, icy emptiness piercing my heart. They left the house defeated and angry, the illusion of control they once had completely shattered. As they walked out, Wesley shouted back, "You ungrateful son!" I closed the door without answering. The house fell silent again. Soon afterward, they began spreading rumors among relatives and acquaintances that I had turned against them, that I was unfilial, trying to use public shame to pressure me. My phone buzzed nonstop with relatives calling, "How can you do this to your parents?" I stayed silent, let the noise pass, and kept working with David on the investigation. "Don't worry about public opinion," David said. "The evidence will speak for itself." A few days later, Wesley, Madeline, and Hannah were officially served with summonses from the prosecutor's office for forgery and attempted theft of estate. David called. "They've been called in for questioning. The game is over." I sat beside Ruby, my daughter finally home, sleeping peacefully with her arms around my neck, and thought about the long road ahead. The fight isn't finished, but I'm ready. Memories faded, pulling me back to the present. The upcoming trial will decide everything. Justice for me, consequences for them. The days waiting for the investigation results were the longest of my life. I poured everything into Ruby, driving her to school, making her favorite breakfast of fried eggs and buttered toast, sitting at the little table coloring bright, wild pictures together. "Daddy, look! I drew you as a superhero defeating the monsters." Ruby laughed, eyes sparkling, completely unaware that the monsters were her own grandparents and mother. I held her tight and silently vowed to shield her from every hurt. But at night, after she fell asleep, I lay awake, mind racing. The crash in Africa, the betrayal, the lonely hospital nights. After being summoned, Wesley, Madeline, and Hannah were questioned separately by investigators. I pictured the scenes from David's updates. Cold interrogation rooms at the Dallas police station, scarred wooden tables, the low hum of recording devices, detectives with piercing stares. Hannah went first. She was the linchpin, the notary who had validated the forgery. Faced with irrefutable evidence, abnormal money flows, the forged power of attorney, notarization records, all three quickly lost the ability to deny anything. David said, "They showed them the transfer logs. Money pulled from the company, the house mortgage, everything timed perfectly with your coma." Hannah broke first. The woman who had once been so strong and clever sat crying and confessed that she had been the one who first proposed creating the power of attorney and personally notarized the fake signature. I was the one who came up with it," she admitted, according to the transcript David sent me. "I was terrified we'd lose everything if he died, so I told his parents we had to draw up the papers. I copied his signature from an old contract and stamped it. That confession was the final knife. Hannah was not a victim. She was the mastermind." Wesley and Madeline were questioned separately to prevent collusion. My father initially tried to justify, "We were only protecting our son's assets." But when confronted with emails, meeting records, and money flowing into his personal accounts, he had to admit his leading role in the withdrawals, the mortgage, and seizing company control. "I signed the withdrawal orders," he confessed, voice shaking. "I thought my son was dead. I needed money for his funeral and for my granddaughter." Madeline collapsed too, admitting complicity. "I agreed to mortgage the house because I was afraid my daughter-in-law would take everything." All three statements matched the mountain of evidence David and the investigators had collected. Handwriting analysis, phone records proving constant contact while I was unconscious. There was no escape. David called. "They signed full confessions. The file is complete." The case was finalized and transferred to court for public trial. The story exploded across Dallas media. Headlines screamed shocking family fraud case, and parents and wife try to seize dying businessman's fortune after Africa crash. I read the papers with a heavy heart. Relatives called, friends texted support, but I stayed quiet and focused only on Ruby. "Daddy, why is everyone talking about Grandma and Grandpa?" she asked innocently. I hugged her. "Grown-up stuff, sweetheart. Don't worry about it." The trial was scheduled in 2 weeks, enough time to steel myself. The nights before, I barely slept, reliving the journey. The terrifying collision in Africa, waking up alone, discovering the betrayal, then fighting back. Now justice was finally coming. At the trial, the entire chain of fraud, forgery, and attempted theft was laid bare before the public. The courtroom was packed, reporters, relatives, my employees, curious strangers. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside David, knuckles white on the armrests. The same middle-aged judge who had presided over the hearing banged the gavel to start. The prosecutor laid it out clearly. Defendants Wesley Lawson, Madeline Lawson, and Hannah Lawson conspired to seize Mr. Cooper Lawson's estate while he lay in a coma after a near-fatal accident. They forged a power of attorney, withdrew hundreds of thousands of dollars, mortgaged his home, and took control of his company. Evidence flashed on screens, fake documents, bank transfers, recorded confessions. Wesley sat with his head bowed, Madeline wept, Hannah pale as death, unable to meet my eyes. The jury found all three guilty of organized fraud. The judge delivered the sentences, voice grave. After reviewing the evidence and confessions, this court rules as follows. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. Wesley Lawson, 15 years imprisonment as the primary orchestrator. Ordered to repay every dollar stolen and forfeit all assets obtained illegally. He stood, face ashen, and was led away in handcuffs, chains clinking. Madeline Lawson, adjudged an accomplice, 4 years suspended sentence plus 2 years home confinement, ordered to repay her share. She collapsed into her chair, sobbing, "Son, I was wrong." Hannah Lawson, 6 years imprisonment and permanent revocation of her notary license for personally legitimizing the forgery. Every transaction based on the fake document was voided, and full ownership and control of the company were restored to me. She stood trembling, eyes red, giving me one last look before being escorted out. Cameras flashed wildly. After the criminal trial, I immediately filed for divorce in family court. With the criminal convictions on record, custody was decided swiftly in the child's best interest. I was granted sole custody. Hannah would have limited supervised visitation after release. David clapped me on the back. "You won, Cooper. Everything is yours again." But the victory tasted like ash. Family destroyed, Ruby without her mother or grandparents. When the gavel fell for the last time, I walked out of the courthouse holding my daughter's hand in silence, closing the door on the entire family tragedy and stepping into a new chapter as a single father, and the rightful owner of everything that had once been stolen from me. We stepped into the bright Dallas sunshine, a cool breeze blowing, but my heart remained heavy. I pulled Ruby close and promised her and myself that we would rebuild. A new life with no betrayal, only peace. The memories of the accident, the betrayal, the trials will haunt me forever, but I will be strong for Ruby. After everything, I decided to sell the old Dallas house, the place tied to too many painful memories. That house had once been the very symbol of happiness. Mornings with Hannah brewing coffee, Ruby toddling through the garden, laughter echoing through every room. But now every corner whispered betrayal. The living room door where Hannah had knelt sobbing and begging. The kitchen where my parents had sat pleading for mercy. I couldn't live there anymore. Every night I woke from nightmares of Africa, forged documents and lies. I moved with Ruby to a new home on the quieter outskirts of Dallas. A peaceful place surrounded by green trees far from the city's bustle. The house was smaller but cozy. 3 bedrooms, a big backyard with a swing set, and a garage just large enough for Ruby's bicycle. On moving day, we painted her room a soft pink together. She grinned from ear to ear, splattering paint everywhere with the brush. "Daddy, I love our new house," she shouted, racing from room to room. I watched her and felt my heart warm for the first time in months. This was a true fresh start, a space completely separate from the past. No more Hannah in the kitchen, no more memories of Wesley on the sofa begging. Just the two of us and the fragile peace I was determined to protect. I restructured the company from top to bottom, removing everyone who had quietly cooperated with the takeover. A few accountants who had stayed silent while Wesley signed withdrawal orders. I held an all-hands meeting. From now on, transparency is the #1 rule in this company. Anyone who breaks it leaves immediately. No second chances. I hired young, eager, honest people and rebuilt the business on a foundation of integrity. Internal audits were strengthened, every contract scrutinized. The company's reputation, battered by the scandal, slowly recovered. The same newspapers that once covered the fraud now ran stories titled, "The Comeback of Cooper Lawson, From the Abyss to Triumph." Orders poured in, stock prices rose, but I no longer chased endless expansion. I stepped back from the daily grind, delegating most operations to a trusted deputy and attending only a few online meetings each week. My real job now was being Ruby's father. I drove her to school, cooked dinner with her, shared every small moment. Before, I had been the constantly traveling boss, leaving Ruby with nannies. That life was over. Every morning I woke early to warm her milk, then biked her to school. She sat on the back, arms tight around my waist, giggling as the wind whipped her hair. "Pedal faster, Daddy." In the afternoons I picked her up. We cooked together, simple spaghetti, salads, and I told silly jokes. At dinner we sat across from each other, talking about our days. "Teacher said I was really good today, Daddy." I clapped. "That's my princess." Ruby gradually opened up again. Her laughter returned. The nights she cried for her mother grew rare. The sad questions about Grandma and Grandpa faded. She started inviting friends over. The backyard rang with children's voices once more. I learned how to be a real father, from the simplest things: cooking, school runs, parent-teacher conferences. Before, Hannah had done it all. I came home late, kissed a sleeping Ruby, and left again. Now I followed recipes from books and YouTube. Weekend pancakes, chicken soup when she caught a cold. My first parent-teacher conference made me as nervous as a schoolboy. I sat among the mothers, listening to the teacher praise Ruby's drawings. "She's very talented, Mr. Lawson." I smiled, chest swelling with pride. These small moments taught me that fatherhood isn't about money or gifts. It's about being there, listening to her stories, holding her when she's sad. I chose a quiet life, far from the noise surrounding the old case. Reporters called for interviews, relatives sent messages, but I turned them all down. I never spoke of the past in front of Ruby, no mentions of her mother or grandparents, just vague, "Everyone is busy with work." I kept the lessons for myself, the nights in that African hospital, waking to a phone full of betrayal alerts, the courtroom where Hannah wept and Wesley hung his head. Those memories made me vigilant, but I refused to let them poison Ruby's childhood. She deserved light, not shadows. Whenever I watched Ruby lost in her coloring, tongue sticking out in concentration, I realized the most precious thing I almost lost was not money, it was family. She would finish a messy, loving picture. "This is you and me in our new house." I sat beside her, helping with the brush, heart full. Money and companies can disappear, but Ruby is forever. I nearly died in Africa, nearly lost her to the greed of those closest to me. Now every moment with her is treasure. From my own tragedy, I learned a hard truth. Greed often begins with fear, but once it crosses the line of decency, everyone pays. Wesley feared losing everything. Hannah feared poverty. Madeline feared loneliness. Yet they chose the wrong path. I remember their confessions. "We were just scared." Fear is no excuse for fraud. I learned that money and power can never replace love and decency. The company may thrive, but without Ruby's laughter beside me, it would mean nothing. I teach her, "Always be kind, sweetheart. Money can be earned again, but a clear conscience is much harder to regain." I believe that staying silent in the face of evil is the same as helping it survive. Truth may come slowly, but justice does not vanish if someone is willing to stand up for it. For too long, I had been silent about the cracks in my marriage, silent as work swallowed my time. But when I discovered the betrayal, I stood up and fought. That choice saved me. It saved Ruby. My message is simple. Never trade your conscience for short-term gain, because the price is always far higher than you imagine. Wesley lost his freedom, Hannah her career, Madeline her son, all for a moment of greed. Ruby and I go on with our new life, free of schemes, filled only with the peace we rebuilt from the ruins. Weekends at the park, ice cream cones, watching sunsets. Ruby is growing, taking real art classes, and I am beside her every step of the way. The tragedy has closed, like the final soft click of the old house's door when I locked it for the last time. Yet standing among those ruins, I realized something. It was not the end of my life. It was only the beginning. Every morning I take Ruby's hand, watch her skip happily through our new home. And I know that living with decency, living true to one's conscience, is not something others give you. It is a choice you make every single day. And from this day forward, Ruby and I will keep walking, not to take revenge, not to prove anything to anyone, but simply to live a life more beautiful than anything the past ever offered.